Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey not through roaring battlefields or thunderous explosions, but into the hushed, almost imperceptible world where wars were waged in whispers. Imagine, if you will, the gentle hum of an old refrigerator in a dimly lit apartment, or the soft rustle of a trench coat on a damp, cobblestone street in a city divided. You're there, standing in the shadows, the chill of a geopolitical standoff seeping into your bones, knowing that every sound, every glance, every seemingly innocent object could be a key to a global secret. It's a world where the wrong word could trigger an international incident, and the right one could prevent catastrophe, or start one. And let's be honest, if you were actually living through it, you probably wouldn't survive a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling particularly cozy, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself drifting back in time, not to the cacophony of World War II's grand battles, but to the eerie quiet that settled over the globe in its aftermath. This was the Cold War, a period of profound global tension that stretched from the mid-1940s right up until the early 1990s. It wasn't a war fought with armies clashing on open fields, at least not directly between the two colossal superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Instead, it was a war of ideologies, of influence, of technological one-upmanship, and most crucially, a war of information. You see, during these decades, the world was essentially split into two opposing blocs: the capitalist West, led by the US and its NATO allies, and the communist East, spearheaded by the USSR and its Warsaw Pact nations. The stakes were nothing less than global dominance, and the terrifying shadow of nuclear annihilation loomed over every decision, every diplomatic maneuver. In this peculiar global stalemate, where direct military confrontation between the giants was unthinkable due to the concept of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, as it was chillingly known, secrets became the most valuable currency. Forget gold, forget oil, forget even the latest pop album that wasn't allowed behind the Iron Curtain. What truly held power was knowing what the other side was planning, what they possessed, and what they truly intended. You could say that information was the new gold standard, only far more volatile and far more dangerous to acquire. Every scrap of intelligence, every whispered rumor, every intercepted message was meticulously collected, analyzed, and hoarded like a dragon guards its treasure. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit office, somewhere in London, or perhaps Washington, D.C., or even deep within the labyrinthine corridors of the Lubyanka in Moscow. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken anxieties. Maps are spread across tables, dotted with pins indicating troop movements, missile silos, or the suspected locations of enemy agents. And what are these agents after? They're after blueprints for a new fighter jet, the precise coordinates of a submarine base, the names of scientists working on a top-secret project, or even just the seemingly innocuous daily routine of a high-ranking official. Because in this game, even the most mundane detail could unlock a critical vulnerability. It's like playing a global game of chess, but your opponent is invisible, and you're trying to guess their next move by listening to the faint creak of a floorboard in the next room. The very nature of this conflict demanded an entirely new approach to warfare. You couldn't just send in a battalion. You had to send in a single individual, armed with wits, training, and most importantly, ingenious tools designed to acquire secrets without detection. This was the era where the term covert operations wasn't just a buzzword, it was the lifeblood of international relations. Every major power had its intelligence agencies, the CIA, the KGB, MI6, the Stasi, each vying for supremacy in this shadowy arena. Their operatives weren't necessarily the suave, martini-sipping characters you might see in films, though some certainly cultivated that image. More often, they were quiet, unassuming individuals, blending into the background, their true purpose hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy. Their lives were a delicate dance between extreme paranoia and the desperate need for trust, a tightrope walk over an abyss of betrayal. You'd probably find that the biggest challenge for many spies wasn't dodging bullets, but remembering which fake identity they were using on which day. Wait, am I Boris the Bulgarian bricklayer or Jean-Pierre the Parisian pastry chef today? My handler is going to kill me if I get this wrong. The relentless pursuit of secrets bred a culture of intense suspicion, not just between nations, but within the intelligence agencies themselves. The fear of moles, deep cover agents planted by the opposing side, became a pervasive obsession. You could be working alongside someone for years, sharing classified documents and late-night coffees, only to suddenly find yourself under suspicion, your loyalty questioned, your entire career and even your freedom hanging by a thread. This internal paranoia, fueled by genuine betrayals but often spiraling into baseless accusations, was a peculiar and often tragic hallmark of the Cold War's intelligence landscape. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of intelligence gathered truly prevented more conflicts, or merely fueled the pervasive paranoia that defined the era, leading to a constant state of high alert that was exhausting for everyone involved. Imagine the pressure. You're an agent, trained to observe, to listen, to blend. You're constantly aware of being watched, even when you're alone. Every street corner, every cafe, every park bench could harbor an enemy operative. It's a feeling of perpetual performance, where your life depends on maintaining a convincing facade. And what did these silent warriors rely on to achieve their objectives? They relied on innovation, on cleverness, on the ability to turn the most innocuous object into a tool for espionage. Because when you can't use brute force, you have to use ingenuity. When you can't shout, you have to whisper. And when you can't see, you have to find a way to let your eyes be everywhere. This intense demand for clandestine information pushed the boundaries of technology and human cleverness in ways that might seem absurd, even comical in retrospect, but were absolutely vital at the time. You needed to photograph documents without anyone knowing you had a camera. You needed to listen to conversations happening miles away. You needed to transmit messages instantly, then make them vanish without a trace. You needed to escape capture, even from the most secure facilities. And sometimes you needed a pigeon to carry a microdot, because, frankly, what's more inconspicuous than a bird? Though, I bet the biggest logistical challenge for pigeon couriers was ensuring they didn't get distracted by a particularly shiny piece of discarded chewing gum. So, as we gently glide through the next hour, we're going to explore the peculiar and often mind-bogglingly ingenious spy gadgets that emerged from this shadowy world. These weren't the fantastical devices of science fiction, though some came pretty close. They were real, tangible tools designed for a very real, very quiet war. They were the hidden ears, the tiny lenses, the invisible mailboxes, and the silent weapons of the Cold War. Each one a testament to human inventiveness under pressure, each one a whisper in the night, carrying the weight of global secrets. You'll find that the true genius often lies not in the complexity of the technology, but in its ability to remain utterly, utterly unseen. And as you consider these silent marvels, perhaps you'll gain a new appreciation for the quiet battles fought, and the peculiar lengths to which humans will go to gain an advantage in the game of secrets. You drift now not through the bustling streets, but into the hushed, almost imperceptible realm of sound. Imagine, if you will, the quietest whisper, the softest rustle of paper, the almost inaudible click of a lock. In the shadowy dance of the Cold War, these weren't just background noises. They were potential gold mines of information, waiting to be unearthed. But how do you catch a whisper from across a room, or through a thick wall, without anyone knowing you're even trying? This, my friend, is where the art of listening silently truly began to blossom, long before miniature microphones became the stuff of spy thrillers. Before we dive into the truly ingenious electronic contraptions, let's take a tiny step back, way back, to the very human desire to know what others were saying. For centuries, it was all about pressing an ear to a door, or maybe, if you were feeling particularly adventurous and slightly unsanitary, a glass to a wall. You'd hope for a gap in the floorboards, a thin partition, anything that would carry the faint vibrations of a conversation. It was crude, unreliable, and frankly, quite uncomfortable for your ear. It was the original low-tech eavesdropping, and honestly, if you've ever tried it, you know the sound quality was usually a solid 0 out of 10. You'd get a muffled murmur at best, and a crick in your neck for sure. The true revolution, the subtle origins of electronic eavesdropping, began not with spies in trench coats, but with the invention of the telephone. Suddenly, voices were traveling through wires across vast distances. And where there are wires, there is the temptation to tap them. Early telephone tapping was, by today's standards, almost charmingly direct. You'd literally connect a second pair of wires to the existing telephone line, often in a basement, a utility pole, or even directly into the switchboard. It was the equivalent of adding another extension to your party line, but without the party. The sound quality might have been abysmal, full of static and the faint hum of the electrical grid, but it was there. You could hear, or at least attempt to decipher, conversations that were never meant for your ears. This was the first quiet attempt to capture whispered conversations over a distance, transforming an everyday communication device into an unwitting conduit for secrets. It was less about a gadget and more about an illicit connection, a simple act of electrical piracy that laid the groundwork for everything that followed. But what if the conversation wasn't happening on a telephone? What if it was just two people talking in a room? This is where the concept of the bug truly emerges, and it's where the ingenuity starts to get peculiar. The challenge was immense. How do you pick up sound waves in a room and convert them into an electrical signal that can be transmitted elsewhere, all without being detected? Early answers were clunky, often involving large, visible microphones hidden, poorly, behind drapes or inside furniture. Think of those old movies where a giant, shiny microphone is clearly visible if you just squint a little. Not exactly subtle, right? The real breakthrough came with the miniaturization of microphones and, crucially, the development of wireless transmission. Imagine a microphone so small it could fit inside a teacup or even a hollowed-out coin. This wasn't just about shrinking existing technology, it was about reimagining how sound could be captured. Early bugs often relied on carbon microphones, similar to those found in old telephone handsets. These worked by converting sound vibrations into changes in electrical resistance, which could then be amplified. The challenge was power. How do you power a tiny device for hours or days without constantly changing batteries? And how do you get the signal out of the room without a telltale wire running under the door? This is where the concept of radio waves became the spy's best friend. Instead of wires, you could transmit the captured audio signal wirelessly to a receiver located safely and secretly nearby. These early wireless bugs were often rudimentary, prone to interference, and sometimes even picked up local radio stations, leading to some truly bizarre, eavesdropping sessions where you'd hear a top-secret discussion interrupted by a jingle for dish soap. You can almost hear the exasperated spy muttering, "Darn it, Khrushchev, could you please just wait until the commercial break is over?" One of the most legendary and truly ingenious examples of this burgeoning art of silent listening, a mainstream historical fact that still fascinates, is the device known as the Thing, or the Great Seal Bug. This wasn't just a bug. It was a masterpiece of passive eavesdropping, and it remained undetected for 7 years. Imagine that. In 1945, a beautifully carved wooden replica of the Great Seal of the United States was presented to the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, Avril Harriman, by a group of Soviet schoolchildren. It was a seemingly innocent gesture of friendship, but inside that seemingly innocuous gift, hidden within the eagle's beak, was a device that would redefine the art of spying. This wasn't an active microphone with its own power source. Oh no, that would have been far too obvious, requiring batteries that would die or wires that would betray its presence. Instead, the Thing was a passive resonant cavity microphone. What does that mean, you ask? Well, imagine a tiny hollow chamber with a very thin, flexible diaphragm, like a drum skin, on one side. When sound waves hit this diaphragm, it vibrates. But here's the clever part. It didn't generate its own electrical signal. Instead, it was designed to be illuminated by an external radio beam from a nearby Soviet listening post. When the radio waves hit the device, the vibrating diaphragm would subtly alter the frequency of the reflected waves. The Soviets, listening in their nearby van or building, would then pick up these altered, reflected waves, decode them, and voila, they had the conversations from inside the ambassador's office. Think about the sheer elegance of that. No power source, no wires, just a cleverly designed cavity and a diaphragm. It was like a high-tech, silent echo chamber that only responded when tickled by a specific radio frequency. It was the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it bug, long before that phrase even existed. The Soviets could turn their beam on and off at will, listening whenever they pleased, and the bug itself remained dormant and undetectable by conventional means when not being actively interrogated by the radio beam. It was a quirky, fringe tidbit of engineering that became a cornerstone of Cold War espionage. Imagine the frustration of the American security detail, sweeping the office repeatedly with their own crude bug detectors, finding nothing, while all their secrets were being broadcast like a silent radio show to their adversaries. It's almost comical, if it weren't so utterly serious. The discovery of the Thing in 1952 was accidental, a chance sweep by a British radio operator during the Cold War's intensifying chill. It sent shockwaves through the intelligence community, forcing a complete reevaluation of how secure communications and spaces truly were. This tiny, passive device, hidden in plain sight, demonstrated a leap in eavesdropping technology that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. It showed that listening silently wasn't just about hiding a microphone. It was about understanding physics, manipulating radio waves, and creating devices that were almost literally invisible to the technology of the time. Historians still argue whether the thing was a unique, isolated triumph of Soviet ingenuity, or if it was part of a broader, more systematic development of passive listening devices that simply remained undiscovered. Regardless, its impact was profound. The legacy of the thing, and these early forays into electronic eavesdropping pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. It forced intelligence agencies on both sides to become paranoid, to constantly sweep for listening devices, and to develop countermeasures. It spurred the development of even smaller, more sophisticated microphones, better amplifiers, and more covert transmission methods. From simple wiretaps to elegantly passive resonant cavities, the journey of silent listening was underway, transforming the very air we breathe into a potential conduit for secrets. And all of it began with the subtle desire to hear what wasn't meant for your ears, pushing the limits of technology to turn the quietest whisper into a loud, undeniable truth. As you drift deeper into this whispered history, you realize that listening wasn't just about being quiet. It was about being invisible. You're not just trying to hear a secret, you're trying to make the very air itself your informant, without anyone ever suspecting. This is where the true ingenuity, and perhaps a touch of the absurd, begins to unfold. We move beyond simply straining your ears and into the realm of transforming the ordinary, the utterly mundane, into an extraordinary silent listener. Imagine, if you will, the hum of an office, the clinking of teacups, the rustle of papers. To the unsuspecting, it's just the soundtrack of a typical workday. But in the shadowy world of Cold War espionage, every single object in that room became a potential ear, a silent sentinel, patiently waiting to capture whispers meant for no one else. You see a lamp on a desk, casting a warm, inviting glow. You might think it's just a lamp, but perhaps, nestled deep within its base, or cleverly integrated into its ornate stem, is a microphone no larger than your thumbnail, tirelessly picking up every word spoken beneath its light. The light, ironically, illuminating the very secrets it helps steal. These were the ingenious microphones concealed within ordinary items, transforming everyday objects into silent listeners. It was a game of hide-and-seek played with technology, where it was always a tiny, unblinking ear. You'd think, surely, someone would notice if their favorite desk ornament suddenly started eavesdropping. But that's where the art lay, in the seamless integration, the subtle alteration that left no clue. One of the most famous, and frankly, most audacious examples of this particular art form is often referred to as the Thing, or the Great Seal Bug. Picture this: it's 1945, and the Soviet Union presents a beautiful, hand-carved wooden replica of the Great Seal of the United States to the U.S. ambassador in Moscow. A lovely gesture, right? A symbol of goodwill at the end of World War II. It hung proudly in the ambassador's office for 7 years. 7 years. You can almost feel the smug satisfaction emanating from the Soviet side for all that time. This wasn't just any bug, it was a marvel of passive technology. Unlike most microphones that require a power source, like a tiny battery that would, let's be honest, die faster than your phone on a cold day, the Thing was entirely passive. It had no batteries, no wires. It was essentially a resonant cavity microphone, designed to be activated by an external radio beam. When a covert radio signal was aimed at the seal from a nearby building, the sound waves inside the ambassador's office would cause a tiny diaphragm within the seal to vibrate. These vibrations, in turn, modulated the external radio signal, bouncing it back to a receiver. It was like shouting at a specific tuning fork in a room, and that tuning fork then subtly changed the echo of your voice for someone else to pick up. A true acoustic marvel, and a mainstream historical fact that still makes you wonder how many other gifts were actually listening devices. Imagine your grandma's prize-winning ceramic cat sitting there, judging your every whispered secret, and you thought it was just collecting dust bunnies. But the Thing was just one spectacular example. The mundane objects targeted for this kind of sonic transformation were practically limitless. Think about the office environment you might encounter. Ashtrays, for instance. A common fixture, especially back then. A hidden microphone could be embedded in the base, perhaps disguised as part of the decorative pattern, or even within a false bottom. When you flicked your ash, you were unknowingly assisting in intelligence gathering. Or perhaps a pen holder, a seemingly innocent receptacle for writing instruments, now quietly capturing every word exchanged across the desk. Even the humble stapler, a tool of administrative tedium, could house a tiny ear, its metallic click now accompanied by the silent hum of espionage. It wasn't just office supplies either. You might find yourself sitting in a seemingly comfortable chair in an embassy lounge, unaware that the very cushion beneath you, or the armrest beside you, contained a discreet microphone. The fabric would muffle it slightly, but the clever design would compensate, ensuring that your casual conversation about the weather, or perhaps something more sensitive, was being faithfully recorded. Picture frames, with their intricate carvings, offered ample space for concealment, turning family photos into unwitting accomplices. Even a flower vase, with its decorative blooms, could hold a tiny bug disguised among the stems and water, listening to intimate discussions. The key to these devices was not just their small size, but their ability to blend in perfectly. They had to look, feel, and even weigh exactly like their benign counterparts. You pick up a pen, and it feels just like any other pen. You wouldn't think twice. But it might be marginally heavier, perhaps, due to the tiny microphone, amplifier, and even a minuscule transmitter tucked inside. Of course, these tiny devices had a battery life that would make your current smartphone blush with envy, because it was probably measured in hours, not days, for the active ones. Talk about a commitment issue. This necessitated either frequent, risky battery changes, or the development of more permanent wired installations, often disguised as part of the building's existing electrical or communication infrastructure. One quirky or fringe tidbit from this era involves the use of spike mics, or contact microphones. While not strictly hidden within an object, these devices allowed agents to turn a wall itself into a listening device. You'd press a sensitive microphone against a wall, and it would pick up the minute vibrations caused by sounds on the other side. This allowed for eavesdropping without ever needing to physically enter a room or plant a bug inside. It was like giving the very architecture of a building ears, transforming silent concrete into a conduit for whispers. Imagine trying to have a private conversation when the very walls literally have ears. It adds a whole new layer to the phrase "walls have ears," doesn't it? The challenges in developing these hidden ears were immense. Miniaturization was a constant battle, pushing the boundaries of electronics. How do you make a microphone sensitive enough to pick up quiet speech, an amplifier strong enough to boost that signal, and a transmitter small enough to send it, all while fitting it into a button, a shoe heel, or a sugar cube? And then how do you power it? The answer often involved bespoke components, handcrafted with painstaking precision, often by engineers who were as much artists as they were scientists. You might think your biggest challenge is finding your keys in the morning. Imagine trying to find a listening device the size of a grain of rice in a room full of diplomats. Suddenly, your morning routine seems positively serene. The psychological impact of these hidden ears was profound. The constant fear of being listened to, of every word being scrutinized, created an atmosphere of pervasive paranoia. You couldn't trust your surroundings. Every object became suspect. This wasn't just about intercepting secrets. It was about fostering an environment of suspicion and self-censorship. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of intercepted data from these ingenious bugs truly yielded actionable intelligence commensurate with the immense resources poured into their development and deployment, or if much of it was simply background noise in the grand symphony of Cold War paranoia. Were they truly effective tools, or more potent as psychological weapons, keeping targets constantly on edge? The quiet hum of a hidden microphone, nestled in a decorative clock on the mantelpiece, or subtly wired into a telephone, even when it was on the hook, was a constant, unseen presence. It was a reminder that even in the most private of spaces, privacy was an illusion. And as you gently drift towards sleep, you can almost hear the faint, ghostly echoes of conversations from decades past, carried on unseen waves, picked up by hidden ears in the most unexpected of places. As the whispers of electronic eavesdropping fade gently into the background, a new dimension of clandestine information gathering begins to emerge from the shadows, a dimension where the eyes of an agent become the ultimate tool. You see, while listening could confirm suspicions or gather snippets, sometimes you needed undeniable proof. You needed to see it. And for that, you needed a camera. But not just any camera. Imagine trying to sneak a bulky, noisy 1950s camera into a secure office, complete with its flashbulb and clunky film advance. It would be less covert operation and more amateur hour at the office party. So the brilliant minds behind the scenes, the quiet architects of espionage, turned their attention to miniaturization. They began shrinking the world down to the size of a whisper, fitting grand secrets into tiny lenses. Drift with me now, into the subtle art of clandestine photography, where the goal was to capture an image without anyone ever knowing it had been taken. You picture the scene, a dimly lit room, perhaps a desk covered in sensitive documents, and an agent, seemingly casual, yet every muscle tense. Their hand might brush against a lapel, or they might seem to adjust a tie, but what they're really doing is activating a hidden shutter. The almost imperceptible click, the whir of a tiny film reel, and then just as quickly silence once more. The elegance of it was in its invisibility, its seamless integration into the mundane. Perhaps the most famous, the undisputed celebrity of spy cameras, was the Minox. This isn't just a quirky tidbit. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Minox became the go-to tool for intelligence agencies across the globe. The CIA, MI6, the KGB, they all loved it. Imagine holding one in your hand. It's barely larger than a cigarette lighter, sleek and metallic, fitting perfectly into the palm of your hand. It was designed in Latvia in the 1930s, long before the Cold War truly heated up, but its compact size and precision engineering made it absolutely perfect for the clandestine needs of the era. You'd slide open its protective casing, and a tiny, high-quality lens would reveal itself, ready to capture secrets on a film strip so small, it almost felt like a toy. But oh, the power it held. It could snap crisp images of documents, maps, or even distant installations, all while tucked away in a coat pocket or a discreet pouch. It was the original point-and-shoot, long before your smartphone existed, designed not for holiday snaps, but for matters of global security. But the Minox, as revolutionary as it was still a standalone camera. The true genius of Cold War camera design lay in its ability to vanish into plain sight, to become an integral, yet unseen, part of an agent's everyday attire or belongings. Imagine a button on your jacket. Looks perfectly normal, right? Just a simple, unassuming button. But upon closer inspection, if you knew what to look for, you might notice a tiny, almost invisible pinhole in its center. That, my friend, was a lens. These button cameras were incredibly ingenious. They often connected via a thin, flexible cable to a small, palm-sized mechanism hidden in a pocket, which contained the film and the shutter release. You could be talking face-to-face with a target, casually adjusting your jacket, and in that fleeting moment, capture a crucial document on their desk without them ever suspecting a thing. It's like trying to explain to someone from the future, who just pulls out their phone and says, "Dude, it's 2024, just use your selfie cam." The level of physical dexterity and mental presence required to use these button cameras effectively was staggering. You couldn't just point and click, you had to feel the angle, estimate the distance, and then execute the shot with practiced, almost unconscious grace. Beyond the button, the ingenuity blossomed. You had cameras disguised as tie clips, their tiny lenses peeking out from beneath a neatly knotted tie, ready to capture a room's layout or the faces of attendees at a secret meeting. There were cameras built into fountain pens, their tips concealing a lens that could record a quick shot of a paper passed across a table. Even seemingly innocuous objects like cigarette packs or lighters could hide a tiny camera. You'd offer someone a light, and as they leaned in, you'd discreetly snap a photo of the papers they were holding or the contents of their briefcase. It was the ultimate hidden-in-plain-sight trick, turning everyday interactions into opportunities for intelligence gathering. And let's be honest, how many agents accidentally took a picture of their own thumb or the inside of their coat pocket? Probably more than they'd admit. The margin for error was razor-thin. The quest for maximum information in minimum space also led to the development of microdot technology. This was the ultimate in photographic miniaturization, not of the camera itself, but of the output. Imagine an entire page of classified text, a detailed map, or even a photograph, shrunk down to the size of a period at the end of a sentence. No, not a period on a page, but an actual physical tiny dot. These microdots could then be hidden in plain sight, stuck onto a seemingly innocent letter, embedded in a book, or even concealed within the binding of a newspaper. An agent could receive a letter from a loved one, and tucked away on the page, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, would be a pinhead-sized dot containing pages and pages of vital intelligence. To read it, you needed a special microscope or projector. It was an incredibly secure way to transfer large amounts of data, assuming you didn't accidentally wipe it off with your thumb. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, But when that picture is the size of a pinhead, you really hope those words are classified and not "your fly is open." The process of creating and utilizing these microdots was painstaking. You'd photograph the original document with a specialized camera, then rephotograph that image through an extreme reduction lens. The resulting film would be a tiny speck, often less than a millimeter in diameter. The effort involved in this process, from the initial photography to the final reduction, and then the clandestine delivery, was immense. And historians still debate the true impact of microdot technology on the actual course of the Cold War, questioning whether the sheer volume of information justified the complex process of reduction and enlargement, or if it was more of a psychological weapon, a symbol of the lengths to which spies would go. But having the camera was only half the battle. The agent then faced the formidable task of actually using it effectively. Think about it, no digital screens, no instant feedback. You couldn't just check if you got the shot. You had to rely on your instincts, your training, and the quality of your tiny lens. Lighting was often poor in the places where secrets resided. You couldn't exactly ask for a spotlight. Focus had to be estimated or preset. And the act itself had to be quick, smooth, and utterly unnoticeable. Many of these cameras had fixed focus lenses, meaning you had to be at a very specific distance from your target document for the image to be clear. Imagine trying to subtly measure out 2 feet from a top-secret file while pretending to tie your shoe. It was a ballet of deception and precision. Once the photos were taken, the film, often just a few frames long, had to be carefully removed and either developed on-site in makeshift darkrooms, sometimes using chemicals disguised as ordinary household items, or transported back to headquarters. The development process itself was delicate, given the tiny film size. One wrong move, one speck of dust, and days or even weeks of dangerous work could be rendered useless. The tension of waiting for those images to be developed, to see if the crucial data had been captured clearly, must have been immense. It was the ultimate test of patience and nerve. The miniaturization of cameras during the Cold War truly revolutionized espionage. It transformed the spy from a mere observer into an active collector of undeniable visual evidence. These tiny lenses opened up worlds that were previously inaccessible, allowing agents to capture blueprints, codes, personnel lists, and strategic plans that could literally change the course of history. They were the silent witnesses, the discreet recorders of grand secrets. And while today you carry a camera more powerful than any spy could have dreamed of in your pocket, there's a certain quiet elegance to these analog marvels. They remind us that sometimes the most profound impact comes from the smallest, most unassuming package. You drift now, gently, from the tiny lenses and hidden microphones, into a realm where the very act of communication became an art of invisibility. Imagine the quiet tension, the gnawing anxiety that must have permeated the lives of agents during the Cold War. Every direct contact, every whispered word exchanged face-to-face, carried an immense, almost unbearable risk. A single misstep, a fleeting moment of inattention, and suddenly, the entire clandestine operation could unravel. That's why, in this shadowy dance of secrets, the concept of the invisible mailbox became not just a convenience, but a vital lifeline. You see, the goal was to transfer information without ever actually meeting. It was like leaving a secret message for someone, but instead of slipping it under their door, you'd hide it inside a hollowed-out garden gnome in a public park, hoping they'd find it before the neighborhood cat decided it was a new scratching post. This ingenious system, known as the dead drop, was designed to create a silent, untraceable bridge between agents and their handlers. Think of it as the original hypersecure cloud storage, but instead of digital files, you're dealing with physical objects, microfilms, coded messages, tiny listening devices, or even a small wad of cash for operational expenses. The beauty of the dead drop lay in its simplicity and its profound ability to minimize direct interaction. An agent could place intelligence at a prearranged location, signal its presence, and then walk away, leaving the item for a different agent to retrieve later. Neither party had to see the other, reducing the chance of being observed together, or worse, being compromised by a double agent. It was the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it service. Only if you forgot where you set it, the consequences were slightly more severe than just not finding your keys. You might, say, inadvertently expose a global spy network. No biggie. Picture yourself now, a Cold War operative, tasked with making a drop. You've memorized the location, perhaps a specific loose brick in an old wall by the river, or a hollowed-out section of a park bench leg, or even a gap beneath a forgotten statue in a quiet square. The planning for these operations was meticulous, almost ritualistic. You wouldn't just waltz up and shove a document into a crevice. Oh no, that would be far too obvious. Instead, you'd perform what's called a dry run, walking the route, observing the area, noting any unusual activity, checking for surveillance. You'd probably do this multiple times, perhaps disguised as a tourist admiring the architecture, or a jogger out for an evening run, or even someone just really interested in pigeons. The goal was to become part of the background, utterly unremarkable. You'd check for prearranged signals left by your handler, perhaps a chalk mark on a lamppost, a specific flower in a window box, or even a very subtly positioned piece of litter. These signals would confirm that the location was hot, safe for the drop, or cold, indicating surveillance or danger. Once the all-clear signal was received, the actual drop itself was a masterpiece of mundane choreography. You wouldn't linger. You'd approach the location casually, perhaps tying your shoelace, pretending to check your watch, or adjusting a scarf. With a practiced, almost imperceptible movement, you'd deposit the tiny package into its hidden compartment. It might be a hollowed-out coin, a classic of the genre, where a microdot or a rolled-up piece of film could be snugly tucked inside. Or perhaps a fake rock, indistinguishable from the real ones around it, with a secret compartment accessed by a magnetic clasp. These were more than just containers. They were extensions of the agent's cunning, designed to blend seamlessly into the environment, to be utterly invisible to the untrained eye. You could be standing right next to one, and unless you knew precisely what you were looking for, you'd never, ever know. It's like when you're looking for your glasses, and they're on your head the whole time, but instead of glasses, it's top-secret intelligence. One of the most famous examples of this ingenious method, which even made headlines in the relatively recent past, was the Spy Rock incident in Moscow in 2006. British agents were accused by Russian authorities of using a fake rock, disguised perfectly to blend into a park, to house electronic equipment that facilitated communication with their assets. The rock was allegedly equipped with a receiver to download data and a transmitter to send it, all powered by a battery. It became a global spectacle, a real-life spy movie plot playing out in the news. You can almost hear the collective gasp of intelligence agencies worldwide, thinking, "Oh, they finally found that one." This incident served as a potent, mainstream historical fact, reminding everyone that while technology evolves, some of the old, clever tricks of the trade remain surprisingly effective. It also probably led to a lot of park rangers getting very suspicious of unusually smooth rocks. Beyond the hollow rocks and coins, the creativity of these invisible mailboxes knew few bounds. Imagine a hollowed-out dead squirrel, strategically placed at the base of a tree, its tiny, unblinking eyes staring out into the park, silently guarding a secret message. Or a discarded soda can, weighted and sealed, with a false bottom, left casually beside a trash bin. There were even stories, perhaps apocryphal, of messages being hidden within the guts of a freshly caught fish, left by a peer for a contact who just happened to be an avid angler. This quirky, fringe tidbit highlights the lengths to which agents would go, transforming the most unassuming objects into temporary, clandestine post offices. It makes you wonder if every time you see a slightly out-of-place object, you should give it a gentle tap, just in case. Though probably best not to tap the dead squirrel. And it wasn't just about leaving things behind. There were also brush passes, a more direct, yet still incredibly subtle method of transfer. This involved two agents briefly brushing past each other in a crowded place, a bustling train station, a busy market, or a packed concert hall. In that fleeting, almost imperceptible contact, a small item, like a rolled-up document or a microcamera, would be exchanged. One agent might drop a newspaper, and as the other agent stooped to help pick it up, the transfer would occur. It was a dance of exquisite timing and practiced nonchalance, requiring immense nerve and precise coordination. The goal was to make it look like an accidental bump, a momentary lapse in attention, nothing more. You'd have to be as smooth as a freshly laundered silk sheet, and just as quick. Of course, these methods weren't foolproof. Counterintelligence agencies were constantly on the lookout for suspicious patterns, for individuals who seemed to be loitering without purpose, or who made repetitive trips to certain locations. The psychological toll on the agents was immense. Every shadow could hide an observer, every casual passerby could be a surveillance operative. Historians still argue whether the elaborate nature of some dead drop setups was more about theatricality for the agent's morale, a way to make them feel truly embedded in the cloak and dagger world than actual operational necessity. Was the hollowed-out brick truly more secure than a simple note under a bench, or did it just make the agent feel more like James Bond? We may never know the full answer, but the ingenuity was undeniable. The very act of using a dead drop was a testament to the agent's discipline. You arrive, you observe, you act, you depart. No lingering, no second glances, no checking to see if the package was retrieved. You had to trust your network implicitly, a trust that was often built on years of rigorous training and the shared understanding of the immense stakes involved. These invisible mailboxes, these silent transfers, were more than just clever gadgets. They were a profound psychological tool, allowing agents to maintain critical distance, to operate in a world where direct human connection was a luxury they simply could not afford. They were the unsung heroes of communication, ensuring that secrets flowed like a quiet river beneath the surface of the Cold War, unseen, unheard, and hopefully forever untouched. As the Cold War night deepens, and the whispers fade into the background hum of the world, we drift now into a realm where silence was still king, but sight became the most potent weapon. Imagine yourself, draped in the velvet cloak of night, or perhaps just the drab overcoat of a government functionary, needing to see what couldn't be seen, to observe without being observed. This, my sleepy friend, is the quiet ballet of enhanced visual surveillance, where the mundane became magical, and a keen eye was worth 1,000 words. You might think of surveillance as simply peering through binoculars, but oh, how much more inventive the Cold War made it. Picture the humble periscope, that staple of submarine movies, allowing sailors to gaze upon the surface world from beneath the waves. Now shrink it, contort it, disguise it. The Cold War spy agencies took this simple principle, seeing over or around an obstacle, and miniaturized it to an art form. You see, a spy rarely has the luxury of a clear line of sight. There are walls, crowds, inconveniently placed potted plants, or even just the subtle curve of a street. Enter the compact periscope. These weren't the clunky, brass-bound tubes of nautical lore. Some were no thicker than a pencil, designed to slip through a keyhole, or even a tiny drilled hole in a wall, allowing an agent to scan an entire room from an adjacent apartment. Imagine the delicate precision required, no sudden movements, no telltale glint of light. You'd carefully extend the slender tube, a mere whisper of metal against air, and then, through a tiny eyepiece, the world beyond your immediate line of sight would unfold. It's like having X-ray vision, but only if you had the patience of a saint and the dexterity of a brain surgeon. And let's be honest, sometimes you just wanted to know if your neighbor was finally watering their plants, not just spying on a double agent. But for serious espionage, this quiet extension of sight was invaluable. Other periscopes were even more ingeniously concealed. Imagine a briefcase, seemingly innocuous, perhaps resting casually on a park bench or inside a diplomatic car. But within its lining, a slim periscope could extend, allowing the user to observe activities outside without ever needing to open the case or even appear to be looking. The eyepiece might be integrated into a handle or a clasp, making the act of looking almost imperceptible. Think about the casual lean, the slight tilt of the head, as if admiring the stitching on the leather, but in reality, you're scanning the faces of passers-by, or the comings and goings from a target building. It's a bit like trying to surreptitiously check your phone during a boring meeting, only with significantly higher stakes and a much larger potential for international incident. Then there were the truly bizarre iterations, the ones that make you chuckle softly into your pillow. Consider the periscope disguised as a newspaper. Yes, a newspaper. You'd hold it up, ostensibly reading the headlines about, say, the latest tractor production figures in the Eastern Bloc, while a tiny, almost invisible lens peeks out from a folded corner, reflecting an image down to a small eyepiece hidden within the paper itself. It's the ultimate in multitasking, catching up on current events while also trying to catch a spy. One can only imagine the agent muttering, "Oh, the audacity of this headline. And look, is that the target entering the building?" But what if your target was across a vast plaza or down a long, winding street? That's where the long-range telescopic lenses came into play, transforming the distant into the disturbingly close. These weren't your average tourist binoculars. We're talking about high-magnification, high-resolution optics, often custom-built for surveillance. Think of them as the great-grandparents of today's super-zoom phone cameras, only much, much larger and requiring considerably more effort to operate. These lenses were often paired with specialized cameras, allowing for photographic documentation of distant scenes. An agent might set up in a discreet observation post, perhaps a rented apartment overlooking an embassy, or a van parked innocuously down the street. The telescopic lens, often resembling a small cannon, would be mounted on a sturdy tripod, its dark maw pointed towards the target. You'd peer through the eyepiece, slowly turning the focus ring, watching as a blurry figure across the street suddenly resolves into sharp detail, perhaps revealing the contents of a briefcase or the subtle gesture of a handshake. It required immense patience, hours of stillness, often in cramped, uncomfortable spaces, breathing carefully to avoid fogging the lens. It was less glamorous spy work and more like a very intense, very quiet, and very high-stakes birdwatching session, except the birds were usually human and carrying classified documents. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the importance of such visual intelligence is the extensive surveillance conducted on diplomatic missions during the Cold War. Both sides meticulously observed embassies, consulates, and residences of foreign diplomats. For example, the CIA and KGB would spend countless hours using these very long-range lenses to photograph individuals entering or leaving these buildings, to identify contacts, document meetings, and track movements. This constant visual pressure was a key component of intelligence gathering, providing crucial data points in the vast puzzle of Cold War espionage. The integration of these lenses into vehicles was also common. Picture a nondescript delivery van, perhaps with a faded logo for Acme Plumbing Supplies, parked innocently across from a target location. Inside, behind tinted windows or cleverly disguised panels, an agent would be operating a powerful telescopic lens, often connected to a camera. The van itself became a mobile, covert observation post, blending into the urban landscape. It was the original creepy van, long before the internet gave us reasons to be suspicious of every white vehicle. Sometimes, these setups even included rudimentary night vision capabilities, using image intensifiers that could amplify the faintest available light, turning the shadowy world into an eerie, greenish glow, making nocturnal surveillance possible. Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit, there were even attempts to disguise these powerful lenses as utterly mundane objects. Imagine a massive telescopic lens hidden inside a specially modified, oversized thermos flask or a seemingly ordinary, albeit rather bulky, picnic basket. The agent would casually carry it, perhaps even stopping for a refreshing drink, all while the lens inside was silently gathering intelligence. The challenge, of course, was making it look natural. It's one thing to carry a thermos, it's another to carry one that looks like it could double as a bazooka. The subtle art of blending in required not just ingenious gadgets, but also a fantastic poker face. One can only imagine the agent trying to look nonchalant with a thermos big enough to hold a small child. The psychological impact of knowing you might be under such scrutiny, even if unseen, was profound. Agents and officials on both sides lived with a constant awareness that every movement, every meeting, every casual stroll might be observed, documented, and analyzed from a distance. This pervasive sense of being watched, of eyes in the shadows, contributed to the deep paranoia that characterized the era. And this leads us to an interesting point of academic reflection. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of visual intelligence gathered actually translated into actionable insights, or if much of it simply contributed to an overwhelming data flood. Was all that painstaking observation truly effective, or did it sometimes just create more noise than signal? It's a bit like trying to find a specific cat video on the internet by watching every single cat video ever uploaded. You'll see a lot of cats, but finding the one might be harder than you think. So, as you drift deeper into the realm of sleep, consider these silent watchers, these extended eyes of the Cold War. From the whisper-thin periscope peeking through a crack, to the mighty telescopic lens drawing distant secrets close, these peculiar gadgets transform the act of seeing into an act of power. They remind us that sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't spoken, but simply observed quietly, patiently from the shadows. You've just drifted through the shadowy world of hidden eyes, peering discreetly from afar, but now, gently, your journey takes a turn into the realm of creation, or more accurately, recreation. Imagine the quiet hum of a perfectly still room, perhaps late at night, where the only sound is the almost imperceptible rustle of paper or the soft click of a tiny tool. You're entering the meticulous, painstaking universe of document forgery, a craft so precise it could fool even the keenest eyes, turning a scrap of paper into a passport to anywhere, or a simple telegram into a world-changing directive. It's like being a master chef, But instead of delicious food, you're concocting perfectly believable lies on paper, each ingredient carefully chosen, each step precisely executed. Consider first the very foundation of any document, the paper itself. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Just grab a sheet from the printer. But oh, if only it were that easy for our Cold War artisans of deception. You couldn't just use any old paper. The texture, the weight, the subtle off-white hue that comes with age, these were all critical tells. A pristine, bright white sheet for a document supposedly from 1955 would stick out like a neon sign in a blackout. So, forgers had to become paper archaeologists, often scavenging for genuine, period-appropriate paper. This might involve buying old books from used bookstores, carefully steaming apart their bindings to harvest blank pages, or even, in more audacious moves, literally sifting through diplomatic waste bins, hoping to find discarded official stationery or blank forms. Imagine the sheer dedication, rummaging through someone else's trash, not for food, but for the right kind of paper. It was less treasure hunt and more paper pilgrimage. Once sourced, the paper often needed to be aged. You couldn't just leave it in the sun for a few days, though sunlight was certainly one tool. Sometimes, a gentle wash with weak tea or coffee solution would impart that subtle, yellowed patina. Other times, forgers would carefully crinkle and smooth the paper, mimicking the natural wear and tear of a document handled for years. They might even introduce tiny, almost invisible folds or creases, or rub a bit of dust into the fibers to simulate decades of quiet storage. Think of it as giving your new jeans that pre-worn, effortlessly cool look, but for a top-secret dossier. Then there were the watermarks. Oh, those elusive watermarks. These intricate designs, embedded within the paper during its manufacture, were a major security feature. To replicate them, forgers resorted to astonishing ingenuity. Sometimes, they'd carefully thin down a genuine piece of paper with the desired watermark, then overlay it onto their forged document, making the watermark appear as if it was part of the new sheet. Other times, they'd use chemical solutions to subtly alter the paper's opacity in specific patterns, or even create custom stamps that, when pressed onto damp paper, would mimic the watermark's subtle variations in thickness. It was a level of detail that would make a modern graphic designer weep with frustration, all done by hand, under a magnifying glass in dim light. Once the paper was perfected, it was time for the ink. And again, it wasn't just about picking up a ballpoint pen. Different eras used different ink formulations. Pre-1950s documents often featured iron gall ink, which oxidizes over time, turning a distinctive brownish black. Modern inks, with their synthetic dyes, behave differently. Forgers needed to match not just the color, but the chemical composition and, crucially, the aging process of the ink. They might use techniques like chromatography to analyze genuine ink samples, breaking them down into their component dyes. Then, they'd blend their own concoctions, often using obscure pigments and binders. They'd even artificially age the ink using heat or specific chemical washes, ensuring that the forged signature or typed text looked not just authentic, but authentically old. It's a bit like trying to perfectly match the faded grandeur of an antique tapestry, but with liquid. And speaking of typed text, the Cold War was the heyday of the typewriter. Each machine had its own unique fingerprint, subtle misalignments, uneven key strikes, or worn characters. A skilled forger wouldn't just type out a document. They'd first meticulously source a typewriter of the correct make, model, and ideally, even the specific machine if they could get their hands on it. They'd analyze the pressure applied, the ribbon's freshness, and the spacing between letters. If they couldn't get the exact typewriter, they'd use a variety of machines, trying to replicate the imperfections, sometimes even manually adjusting the platen or the type slugs to mimic the telltale quirks of a specific original. Imagine setting up a tiny mechanical orchestra, each key a different instrument, all playing in perfect, slightly off-key harmony. Then came the seals and stamps, the official imprimatur that lent authority. These weren't just rubber stamps from the stationery store. Official seals were often embossed, leaving a raised impression, or printed with incredibly fine detail, sometimes even with security inks. Forgers had to become miniature sculptors and engravers, creating their own dies out of metal or hardened rubber. They'd use precise tools, tiny chisels, and even electroplating techniques to replicate the intricate designs. For wax seals, they'd experiment with different wax formulations, colors, and even the subtle imperfections left by the original sealing tool. They'd learn how to apply just the right amount of pressure, how to create that satisfying crackle when a real wax seal breaks, and how to subtly embed a stray fiber or two, just like a genuine, slightly messy government office. But the ultimate challenge, the true test of a forger's skill, was the signature. A signature is more than just a name. It's a personal flourish, a unique dance of hand and pen, imbued with the signatory's personality, their mood, even their caffeine levels that morning. To replicate a signature perfectly, forgers would practice for hours, even days, tracing and retracing, studying the pressure points, the speed of the strokes, the subtle hesitations. They'd use light tables to trace, but then they'd freehand it repeatedly until muscle memory took over. Imagine trying to perfectly mimic your boss's scrawl, but with your life on the line. One false loop, one shaky line, and the whole operation could unravel. It required an almost meditative focus, a complete absorption into another person's handwriting. Sometimes they'd even try to replicate the faint ghost impression a real signature leaves on the page beneath it, just to add that extra layer of verisimilitude. And what about photos? Many identity documents carried photographs. Forgers weren't just swapping out pictures, they were integrating them seamlessly. This often involved delicate cutting with surgical scalpels, thinning the edges of the new photograph, and then meticulously